he had a sense of humor that was bigger than anything. And he made us laugh. And that's disarming as well, right? When you can laugh, sometimes you poke at a hurt that you can't talk about.
Brian Christianson was going through one of the hardest chapters of his life. His wife was in the hospital with dementia, and he was on his own, and he didn't know where to turn. Then someone suggested he try a men's shed.
He didn't know how to cook a meal. He didn't know how to do his own laundry and things like that. And he was feeling quite out of sorts and ended up at Sage. And someone said, well, there's a men's sheds meeting that's hosting here. Why don't you drop in and have a look at that? And he did. And he said it changed his lives in so many ways.
What happened next didn't just help Brian cope, it changed how he saw himself, his community, and the people around him. We're going to tell you more about his very touching story. But first, in case you're wondering, men's sheds are community spaces that help men connect and talk and create. And they can happen in person or online. Today, we're going to explore how Alberta's virtual men's shed is helping men find connection and belonging, all from the comfort of their own homes.
Good places to go to.
Well, specifically, the virtual men's shed came about during
And
COVID.
with the men's shed,
So
he has
I was part of a shed that was meeting at a group in Edmonton called Sage now, and I'm sure your community will be familiar with Sage. And we were in-house, and as COVID came by, they closed the doors and said, carry on as best you can. And the fellow who was our host at that time at Sage was wondering what to do, and we decided we'd go Zoom. And so we've been here ever since the beginning of that world pandemic.
And what was it like when you first started doing them online?
Oh gosh, we'd already formed for a while, so we had connections. We knew each other, and it was just nice to be able to see each other's faces because, of course, we were all socially isolated at the time, and it was a way to pick up. And then we were being mischievous. We were always looking for ways that we could get together in parks and stuff like that. But it really did allow us to continue on with something that we valued at Sage.
Do you recall your first virtual meeting?
Um, Probably we weren't very good at it back in those days. Not that we're a whole lot better now. But I think very early on, as you saw today, we had a guest speaker or speakers come in today, and that's been a very powerful way of drawing guys in. So we discovered that guys might not go into a classroom to learn about anything, but somehow if you can bring the teacher into their rooms, they'll attend. And so we made a couple of neat connections in Edmonton very early. One being the University of Alberta, so researchers on a variety of topics. And then we hooked up with a fellow who is a historian from our local Fort Edmonton Museum here. And he was always telling us stories of history in Edmonton. So anything that's sort of either answered questions that were important to us or put us into a visual space where we could imagine things that we'd like to be curious about seemed to work really well. So we had a lot of
And
people show up today just because of that experience, I think, or that patterning that guys seem to really enjoy.
when did you start adding the guest speakers to
Oh,
the
very
shed?
early on. Yeah, we
Mhm.
somehow it was decided that we weren't that interesting amongst ourselves to entertain and that we'd be best to bring somebody else in. I don't know if that's entirely
Oh,
true.
I think you're cutting yourself a bit short there.
We have a few stories to tell. Absolutely. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. What do you think that these spaces, these men sheds, why are they important for men?
Well, it really is that social connection. We need a place to belong. We need a place to connect and to share stories just for our own balance. And this is a way of achieving the first two of those things. And it's also a way of practicing storytelling, which is a creative act, right? Storytelling, we tend depend so much on storytelling to make sense of our reality and to communicate with each other. But you can get better at it. And this is a venue that helps us to mine our stories and to tell them and to learn about each other that way and stay alive.
Yeah, storytellers, that's something that humans have always loved since hanging around, sitting around a fire. We always love a good story, but how do you get people to come forward? Like you said, it improves their storytelling. How do you get people to even open up at all?
And I'm going to confess to you, I was a social worker by training, and I've worked
Mm.
with men for a long period of time. And I was in studying about men's sheds, there's a principle that is often talked about, and it's called health by stealth. And that just, when I read about that, it just it was a light shining in a way that I was so familiar with. And it's this. I guess the aphorism is that you can't lead a horse to water. No, you can lead a horse to water. You can't make them drink.
Mhm.
And it's the same in men in terms of education. We love to be educated. We love to connect. We love to share stories. Um, we love to talk about, as we did today, about an important issue for aging men, which is our hearing and how that connects to our ability to carry on in communities. But if you opened up a classroom and said, we're going to have a lecturer come in, would you enjoy that? Most guys will say, yeah, where's the nearest coffee shop? I'd rather head down there and just have an informal conversation. So we don't do it in that particular fashion. So the hearing conversation we had today came up over conversations we've just been having about oh yeah, I love going down to such and such a thing, but it's such a bugger to because now I can't always hear across the table. Somebody goes, well, that's interesting. I can't do that either. And then realizing that, gosh, there's a kernel of a um, an incentive to learn in that, right? But it's not going to be something that we can lead people to. But if we just sort of picked up on that and said, well, hey, let's bring some guys in that can talk to us a bit more about that and see what we hear and how that applies to our life and how we might as we did today, we talked about accommodation, right? How do we accommodate each other, knowing that we're all going down that same path of, or a lot of us are, in terms of losing that hearing acuity. What can we do to just make that easy for ourselves in this environment? And that becomes a very natural conversation, and guys will embrace that because this is not a big secret, but guys do care about each other and they care about themselves and they want to engage in ways that are caring, although it's not necessarily part of our socialized prescription, right? To sort of to admit vulnerability or to encourage others to talk about the ways in which they're feeling fragile or vulnerable. That's just not in the way we're raised. But given the opportunity, guys want to have those conversations. So we just make that space possible for them. That's what's happening in the virtual shed room there.
Who tends to join? Is there a particular kind of person, and how do you get people involved?
Well, um, that's an interesting question. So a lot of the people we have a kernel, a core group of people that have been meeting since what is it? Are we going back to 2018 now, since the pandemic was struck? So there are some people present today who have been attending pretty continuously since that time. Um, But here's the thing, men sheds, as a principle, we want to be accessible to everybody. So you've got to lower the barriers to accessing the opportunities to have those conversations as much as possible. And there's lots of ways of doing that in a physical sense, but the virtual reality is a great barrier reducer. So when we tell people that you can come in, you don't have to go down to a shed where you might have to meet a whole bunch of guys that you're not really sure about. You just kind of come in and nothing's expected of you in the virtual shed. Yeah. So when I send out a notices of invite to people, I say, "Come on in, participate or listen. Either is fully acceptable, and we'll welcome you as you are." And when guys are encouraged just to come in that way, it just really is a safe space for them to come in and have a look around. Some of them stick, and some of them use that as a transition. I'm surprised at the number of guys that come in and saying, somebody told me about men's sheds, or I heard about this online and I thought I should check it out because I'm interested in finding a real shed and I don't know where to go. And we become a way finder for them to get into physical sheds, but they want to come in and just kind of see if that's the kind of talk we do is something that they would like to do and if our interests line up and stuff. So we're a test ground for a lot of people that move on to find their physical sheds in their neighborhoods, and hopefully those that start them up as well. So,
I love that idea, just testing the ground to see if this is something that I like.
yep.
And I suspect they can keep the camera off if they want to.
Oh, absolutely. You don't
Mhm.
have to say a word, and you're valued. You're acknowledged that you're in the room, and you're one of us for that session. Absolutely, yeah.
Mhm. Did you ever think that this would continue after COVID, or did you just think this was going to be like some kind of stopgap method to get us through that time?
I had thought we'd go back to our old venue, and as it turned out, with funding changes, that venue never opened up again. And so the fellow that was hosting the virtual shed wanted to continue that. I think his health had deteriorated over the time that COVID happened, and he's passed on since as well. So I think he found the that that low barrier of accessibility. He really appreciated that. And he was just really, really good at finding guest speakers. So I think he was a salesman in his life, and he just knew how to connect and talk to people and invite them in and get them to do things that they might have thought about but never really realized they could do. And he was just really, really good at that. So we benefited from his talents and continued on as a virtual shed rather than going back and looking for a physical space. And we did try. We went into the parks during the summertime and we met in parks at picnic tables and we went to coffee shops and the virtual shed drew us back just because we could bring in speakers and have those sorts of opportunities to hear from people that we wouldn't normally hear from in our day-to-day lives. Uh, he's a real shed story, absolutely. So at the time we met him, he was living on his own. His wife was suffering from dementia and had been hospitalized. And so he was going about all those tasks. He didn't know how to cook a meal. He didn't know how to do his own laundry and things like that. And he was feeling quite out of sorts and ended up at Sage. And someone said, well, there's a men's sheds meeting that's hosting here. Why don't you drop in and have a look at that? And he did. And he said it changed his lives in so many ways. It gave him a place to come and talk about some of the problems he was facing living. Um, it humanized him in ways that it was so interesting. He had been a salesman and a fairly good salesman all his life and had lived a good life and had raised two boys who've gone on to be very uh, good contributors in society. And his wife was just I think his pal as well. Um, and when she left, he ended up living in a residence, which is in the inner city in Edmonton. So he's surrounded by street people. And he was quite rural, quite white, quite privileged in his thinking, and he had a real negative opinion of the people that were surrounding him. But something about coming into the shed changed him, and he talked about this all the time. He said, I just really softened in my time here of opening up and listening to you guys, caring about each other, and giving a chance to care in my way, and I'm even caring more about myself. But I care more about my community as well now. I really enjoy the people, and I can stop and talk to the street involved people now and say hi to them, and I'm not so intimidated. And they said this has just been a real growth experience for me. That was his story. So that's why he stayed in sheds, and the virtual shed was his particular talent. So it continued on that way.
Where did the growth come from?
His personal growth,
Yeah.
I think it was sitting in a circle of other guys who were disarmed and willing to talk about the things that they saw, happening on the streets and how it affected them, and to talk a bit about what must be the reality of those people as well. So it was getting out of their personal experience and trying to be more less central, I guess, less centralized in their thinking and a bit more empathetic. And he just enjoyed those conversations and really took them to heart and began applying them to his life situation. So he would talk a lot about those softening experiences that he had and opening experiences, and then just inviting a lot of different people into the shed and having to be the host there. I think he found that he opened up because that was the best way of engaging with people and helping them to find their way into the shed. And the salesman, he's not without his people skills, but this was applied in a way that I don't think he would have anticipated when he was in the midst of his sales career.
What a beautiful story.
Yeah, and we benefited from that as well. He had a sense of humor that was bigger than anything, and he made us laugh, and that's disarming as well, right? When you can laugh, sometimes you poke at a hurt that you can't talk about, and then you can bring it out a little bit. And he was very good at creating that kind of a space where we could laugh at ourselves, we could laugh at each other, but not in a humiliating kind of a way, just a disarming, opening kind of a way. So very special experience to have as guys, right? Also recognizing that we're all getting into retirement years and making these connections is not as easy as it was in the workspace. So what can we do to really make this rich for us and something that is going to be nurturing and sustaining and will carry on for the next guys, right? We all kind of awoke to that. When I
You
discovered
made
sheds, I was doing research actually in my city job as a social worker, and I realized that I didn't have a strong network. And when I retired, I wouldn't have a lot of people around me that I could go and talk to. And I thought about that. And I thought, well, I better get on with finding those circles. And I read about men's sheds. And the model was just so simple and so clear and so powerful. And it's really hard to fail at a shed, which, as some guys will tell you, is just you keep it simple. You know, you invite guys into a space, maybe have some coffee, keep them comfortable, and then start talking about what's going on for you. How can you care for yourself? What's in the community that you care about? And that's really interesting. What could we do to be a part of that process of caring? So I'm talking on and on here, but we, for a long time in the group that Brian led before we got into the guest speakers, talked about building bee houses in downtown Edmonton because we wanted to preserve the world for the next generation. And we thought the bees would be an important uh, pathway for us. So we talked about bees. We eventually started building some small bee houses in-house, and we went off and visited with beekeepers and aviaries around the city. And we never once built a successful beehive or bee house. We failed at a lot of prototypes, but gosh, we had important times exploring that, right? And just telling each other where we're going to go for the next visit, and making sure everybody can get there, and those enabling skills are caring skills, and they're the ones that carried us through. The bees probably didn't benefit a whole lot from our efforts, but we really benefited from the efforts of trying to help
Mhm.
bees.
That's funny. Do you find that that was a challenge when it came to going virtual and continue with virtual, that there wasn't like this distraction of building something? Because that's how it was introduced to by Merv to me, is that it's just nice to have a place where you can busy yourself doing something because guys like to be fixing things, right? Is it was there some kind of challenge with having it just virtual so there's nothing to fiddle around with?
Yeah, and again, this is health by stealth. So I don't tell
Mhm.
guys what I'm thinking, but this is what I've noticed in the group.
I won't tell anybody.
We come in and we talk about, sometimes it's just a free for all, right? We can talk about any particular theme, or sometimes we'll set up a theme. So we've talked about things like our first cars, or remember back to the time of your first paid job, getting that first paycheck. And once we start the theme and people start telling stories, it's amazing the wisdom that comes out of the room, or the historical stories that come out. What's an example? I'll give you a great example. I think we invited guys to come in and talk about the very first paycheck they got. And we heard then about what were safety standards like back in the, how old were we? Back in the 60s, I guess, right? 60s and 70s when we were first taking on our first jobs, and how much that's changed, and what skills we learned to organize and to talk to management, and let them know about our safety concerns. And although we live in a very safety conscious world right now, we didn't recognize that we were drivers in that, right? And so to begin to see that you've had an impact in life that way, and a meaningful contribution, and it's just something that's very growth oriented, right? When you can be reminded of the ways in which you contributed. So we heard lots of stories about just what we've changed in the world since the very beginning. And one experience we had was talk when we first when I first took on the hosting job, and I came on out of valuing out of respect to Brian when he passed on. We were looking for someone, and I was retiring, so I thought, well, I'll put my hat in at it. And I was talking about my retiring experience, and others were talking about theirs, and we just learned so much there about the. Here's a statement that didn't come from a book. It just came from the men themselves. They said, we're trying to reinvent ourselves now that we're retiring in ways that are meaningful. And the one thing we've learned is that you can't reinvent yourself in isolation. You have to do it in community and I just thought, why that should be written down in a book. And of course, it has been repeated lots by sociologists and philosophers and uh, um, people that are interested in collecting those sorts of knowledge. But we knew that, and we told the story and made it our own, right? And that's powerful, I think, when those sorts of experiences happen. So what does the virtual shed do? We create knowledge and tell stories that are meaningful, that make life meaningful for others. And so I think that's a valuable contribution.
Going back to that, why do you think we need to reinvent ourselves in a collective?
Well, in retire when you're working, you are socialized to perform a particular task in a particular team sort of a way, and your whole life. Uh, I'll speak for men because I know of the male experience, right? That's particularly dominant in our lives, and we really look to be able to perform and produce in a work setting as the way to give meaning to our lives. When you retire and nobody's asking you to come in and do a particular thing, it, your day has ended. And then your life kind of ends, that old life, that early life where you're proving yourself by performing externally all the time is gone. So you have to move on to the next stage. And that's a difficult transition for a lot of us to move to that space now where we have to start thinking more internally. What is meaningful? How do I make my life meaningful? Well, I might be an elder. I've had a lot of lived experience. Maybe there's something in mining that and ensuring that learning is part of the collective voice of stories that we tell each other about the world. And so I can't let those disappear. So the sheds become a place to come and tell those stories and to rekindle them and to refine them and to enrich them and just to share them, right? So I think that's an important role. And I think if we look around right now, we're seeing men's sheds as a really growing phenomena. And I think it's going to be an influencer in our communities for a long time to come. And I don't think we've reached the peak yet, but uh, we've discovered that we can do that through men's sheds, provide men with a way of reconnecting with the world and giving back meaningfully in ways that aren't competitive, hard-edged producer sort of a scenarios as they might well have been during their work years, right? This is more just responsible citizen kind of activity now that we're involved in. So it keeps us relevant.
Everyone needs to feel that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's wonderful when you can find those spaces to do that. Yeah.
And it also shows to me, because of course there's this debate now about whether being on social media and being on screens, it's taking away, it's making us more lonely than ever. Whereas this is an example of really interactive time and that's accessible too, to be on a camera and or on a screen and accessible, like you said, for everybody. And much better than I think perhaps spending time not being interactive.
Absolutely. And I'll go away we hold our sessions on a Friday late morning, and I'll go away thinking, that was a wonderful conversation I got to be part of today, but I forget that it was on screen, right? It's in my head as if I've had real interactions with my friends out there. Well, I have had real interactions with friends all over the place,
Yeah.
and I can see past the camera into the hearts and faces of real people.
I love that. Tell me a little bit about what you feel when you wrap up a session on a virtual men's shed.
Well, I'm always taken someplace that I wouldn't ordinarily have taken myself that particular day, right? I might be stuck in front of my YouTube reading newspapers and things like that. But it's not as satisfying as having a conversation where people are highlighting the things that are significant for them and draw my attention in new ways, right? Pull me out of myself, I guess, in some sense, and back into the world and challenges me to ask questions and to reframe and to give balance, give importance to things I might not otherwise have noticed. So I go away with that experience. And then I get these conversations transcribed by AI, and I get to mine those for the nuggets that were in there, and I share those back with the guys, saying, we're pretty creative, we're pretty wise. Let's listen to some of the things we uncovered at the last session, and I share that back, and in that sense, we're more than just a virtual meeting because I carry that on in the sharing through emails and well, primarily through email, some on social media platforms and stuff like that, just reminding them of what we've talked about and where that might take us next, posing questions around it, right? I don't just write that down as here's the gospel, but it's what uh, what might we do with that concern we have about uh, walking into a room? We talked about hearing today and not wanting to admit that I can't hear and not knowing who else in the room might be facing a similar challenge. How am I going to respond to that? So we give permission to do that kind of reflection, and then
That's brilliant to
yeah,
be
isn't it?
recording that and feeding it back. Because sometimes over the course of like an hour-long session, so much stuff was said and so much was out there
Yeah,
that an hour later, sometimes I forget what I've said, right? But
And
for
I
you to
try to put
record
it,
that,
I try to put it into a visual image sometimes, and
yeah.
I haven't had feedback, but I think that's been part of the charm as well, right? Is to take what we've learned and try to reconstruct that visually somehow and send out people with a picture, which is not so hard to do these days with AI, right? I can tell AI all the things that I thought were significant and ask it to help me compose some visual references that I can send back to guys. And I think it does keep the conversation alive and keeps guys coming back so they can have more of that um, stretching and massaging and percolating, right?
And how do you get the word out about this? How can we get more people involved in these virtual sheds?
Oh, there we're not as skilled as we could be, right? We're older guys, and I think we miss some opportunities. We recently had a conference here in Edmonton, and I decided I wouldn't attend because I'm local, and I thought they were bringing in people from all over the world and or all over the community. Perhaps I could leave my space for someone else. And then Merv, our friend Merv, reminded me that having some visual reference or something there to speak of the virtual shed would be important. So I actually made our first poster. But other than that, I try and post the stories to some of my shedders that are involved in organizing the Alberta Men's Shed movement and Men's Sheds Canada. Sometimes they grab the learnings we've created and they've posted them just for others to consider and reflect on. You know, here's a interesting thought that came out of a shed. So then we can put our name up to it, and people can find their way back to us. So that's one way. Otherwise, we're advertised on the Alberta Men's Shed website. We exist there. But I don't think people would necessarily know what a virtual experience is like. And yeah, so we have some things to learn yet.
Well, we'll definitely be helping you here at Unison and at Kirby and Viner and Medicine Hat. So we'll get the word out there as well. Because, the way you described it, you're not losing anything. Or maybe you can just describe that too. Are you losing anything by being virtual? I mean, you've mentioned all the advantages of it, having the speaker being, and it's very accessible, but are there disadvantages with virtual?
I wouldn't, I'm going to say that it's different, not necessarily a disadvantage, but all men's sheds allow guys to come forward and to learn from and to share with others particular skills and things that they have. And in a real shed, it might be very tactile, right? So you might actually be getting onto a wood lathe or something like that. And those are the sorts of skills that can be transferred. We don't transfer those sorts of skills, although there's information that we can share about how to do those things. But it's back to what I was telling each other or describing earlier was the storytelling, right? That's a skill that we can all practice and share and benefit from. So that's our craft here in the men's shed is the storytelling.
Well, you've certainly demonstrated that here today. You're a fantastic storyteller, and thank you for doing this. I really
Thank you for the
appreciate this,
opportunity.
Michael.